So, Richard, thank you for chatting with me this morning. I always appreciate your time. Um, as you know, the purpose of our chat really is for me to be able to offer some of the people watching this a little bit of an insight into the approach that you use working with your clients, especially as I can see myself that what you offer is something that could be quite easily translated across to the online setting. And I guess for people who may not know anything about mirroring hands or know who you are, it's a bit of a challenge as well. But how would you tend to describe mirroring hands to people if they were saying, what is this mirroring hands?
Yes, it is the thing. And hello, Lawrence, lovely. It's always my great pleasure to work with you. And
Can you tell that I'm not a professional filmmaker in that regard?
Oh no, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. But the to some extent, from a sort of I suppose a corporate point of view, morning, Kat. The mirroring hands is a slightly unfortunate brand name, because what the hell's that? And I do understand people going, was it to do with mirrors? Is it to do with hands? And just trying to be logical through the time. But of course, this has a long history going right back, 40 years, 50 years, even further, through Milton Erickson, then into Ernest Rossi, who was the one who really brought it together in the 80s and 90s. And then I came along in the early 2000s and latched onto to Ernie like an Australian leech and wouldn't let go. And after about a decade or so, he decided I'd learned enough, and then he just suddenly opened up, and I became no longer his sort of lapdog, or sort of someone who was begging, but I became his apprentice. And then finally ending up in 2017, where he said, let's write a book together, and I want you to add your stuff, and you be the lead author. So that was all pretty heady. I think most people listening probably are pretty familiar with the name Milton Erickson. And some people a little less with Ernest Rossi, although those that do will fully appreciate the extraordinariness of him. So I'm just that's a pretty good lineage I'm running down, and sometimes I find it a little. People say, well, where's this coming? I have to say Milton Erickson, Ernest Rossi, me. Anyway, I've now embraced it because we've had a couple of years and I travel all around the world now producing it. So mirroring hands is really just talking about the mechanism when you do the technique is utilizing the hands, and we're looking at the reflections between the two of the hands. So that's really the way we do it, but it's more of that sense of through the looking glass, Alice in Wonderland, through the looking glass of the opposites of and the nature. And in its very, very simple presentation, we put what we do is we're gathered. Our problems are gathered and usually dominated by the problem. So what we need to do, and as you know, when I teach it, we go through what is really behind all this systems theory and all kinds of great, fascinating things. But fundamentally, at a human level, what we need to do is differentiate the elements. We need to pull them apart like we do with a car. Let's pull out. So here's the good bits. And we've pulled out of the spark plugs and the things that, they're all working. But here, the carburetor's not working. So if we have the carburetor over here, what do we need to know? How? And you can explore then the thing that is wrong, and suddenly you've got what's not wrong. Now, what is the distinction between, I suppose, the mirroring hands approach, which really goes back to Erickson, is that it is not driven by any form of direction from the therapist. What it is driven by is responsiveness and an interactive, co-created experience with the client, assuming that the client is capable, not only capable, but that's actually where therapeutic techniques and protocols emerge from. I teach quite a longer description, but every single therapy we have has emerged from a human being first. But people have observed it noted it, explored it, and enriched it, which is absolutely fantastic. But in mirroring hands, what we do, we give it back to the client. So the fundamentals is to return the responsibility back to the client. And we do this in a variety of ways. So we have both the mirroring hands technique, which is beautiful, but sometimes that's not what a client wants to do. They go off and they're in visual imaging, or they're in somatic frameworks, or they're in belief systems, which is sort of a CBT type of thing. So there's also an approach that is this client responsive co-creative experience.
It's definitely a fascinating approach. Like I've been very lucky to have had a couple of opportunities to experience some training with you, and even if I think back to the last time I did some training with you, I was partnered up with the wonderful Paul Michel, who I literally had just met that morning, and it's gone on to be a great friendship from that training, which is very thankful for. But even just what was able to happen in that very short exchange as an introduction, in terms of, without getting too confusing, now I had one hand that was kind of representing the future and one hand that was representing the past. And it was a very real experience of me of noticing the unconscious movements that my hands were doing at that time. And it for me, one of the things I know is that if I see a client present and their hands are going all over the shop while they're talking, then it really kind of suggests what approach I might want to utilize as we move further into the session as well.
I mean, one of the big distinctions, and I do, I've really absorbed myself into the hypnotherapeutic community as successfully and as enthusiastically as I can to really learn, because I've only really been engaged in that Ericksonian type of framework. And I know there's a whole other school of thinking. Even within Ericksonian stuff, there's a variety of schools of thinking. But this is very different. And what's interesting is people say, well, how do you treat someone with a particular disturbance? And I'll say, well, that's where we start, because I'm client responsive. Someone comes in, and even something pragmatic like smoking or weight loss or something. I'll start. That's where we start, because that's what the client wishes to start with. But unlike most other therapies, I don't lead the process or take them to that. I say, let's put it out. I wonder. There's an induction process. We'll talk about that in a second, I'm sure. But once we've decided, it's all invitational. And I wonder, and I know you're talking to Rob McNeely. You've talked to him. Same sort of thing. He's Ericksonian invitational stuff. But even the stuff I do is even more passive than, or rather is less even directing in the invitations. But I wonder, it's more curious. Yes. I wonder which hand, and I wonder what that hand wants to receive. And certainly sometimes people will go the weight loss. And I had someone who was a bulimic. And so she put the bulimia, and as you say, these unconscious movement of the hands, things we call ideodynamic responses, meaning that are driven from inside out, in the same way that 3 times a day you feel hungry, but you have no idea what the processes were that created it. You just know you're hungry and you have to do something. So when you're doing mirroring hands, the hand starts to move or feel a certain way. You have no idea why it does that, but you go with it. So she put the bulimia in this hand, and she found it moved certain directions. And she said, oh, it's going down. Oh, that's interesting. And she was almost, she wasn't in a trance or relaxed or settled. She was working hard. The hand did something. And I said, well, I wonder if you draw your attention to the other hand, and I wonder what's there. So this is an extraordinary thing. Now, this is very similar, some people say, to parts therapy. Well, compared to mirroring hands, parts therapy is about an hour old. But in parts therapy, again, I find it's not so much directive, but compared to mirroring hands, it is. Put that part there. Now let's talk to that part.
It is very directive, yeah.
We'll go, I wonder what part will go in here and what part. And I wonder what you'll do with them. And sometimes I bring them together. Sometimes I do it. Sometimes I throw them. But anyway, she went down there. Then she explored here for a little while. And while we were talking and looking at, and she began to sort of reflect on her things, and I didn't know what she was reflecting on. Every now and again, she she shared with me what was going on. She said, "Oh, I'm thinking about this." And I'm going, "Wonderful." But what it was it entirely her process. There was nothing required from me other than to be present and to be responsive as necessary when required, which makes it very difficult because there's no rule book. Anyway, she's moving away, and her other hand was down by her side, and it was sort of like that, and it just suddenly went, bleh. She looked down beside herself and said, "Oh, that's interesting. I think I just let it go." I went, "Did you? How wonderful." And what do you want to, is there something you want to do with this hand? And she did something or another with this hand and finished it. Anyway, the next day, it was at a workshop. The next day she came in, she said, "It was weird. I wanted to eat this morning and I didn't." Cool. Then she went on during the day. Now, about 6 or 8 weeks later, I was doing some online stuff just with the Mirroring Hands Facebook group. We were just doing some ongoing stuff. And I related the story of this wonderful girl. I said, "I'm afraid I don't know anything of the follow-up, but I hope she did well." Anyway, in comes on the message, but, "Hi, I'm Kaz. I'm the girl." I've never gone back to it. And I've lost, I don't know, 10 or 15 kilos in the period of time. So that's a great example. Some examples are a little bit more subtle, but that's a very a good example. Now, I don't know what sort of genius I would need to have to know how to create that response. Now, this equally happens in other therapies as well. We get people and take them into a frame. And the body itself does the healing work. I love Mirroring Hands because it allows the client to take them to the place they want to go without any assistance from me. Even though with my assistance, they might go to a great place, but I've perhaps affected the nature of the place. Maybe I've taken them to a place that does good, because in essence, and this is the big thing I've looked at, everything does some good. What I look for is, does it do the most good? And the only person who is able to take them to the place that is the most for themselves tends to be the client. And I think even people doing reasonably directive or just suggestive stuff, it's when they find the client goes off without them that actually the client does the most effective work. And so Mirroring Hands embraces that from the very beginning.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the actual process itself of Mirroring Hands?
Yeah, so in the Mirroring Hands process, it's very much this idea of doing things that shift the burden, as Erickson said, the burden of responsibility, but the activity of responsibility back to the client. So constantly the teaching that I do for the therapist is know what's going on, be aware of what you think about what is going on and where they should go, have questions in your head that you could ask if needs be, but then for God's sake, shut up and keep it to yourself until the client indicates that that's a required process. So there's when I teach it induction, which sometimes I use, mostly, as you say, hands are going and it's already there. And I say, wow, what's in that hand? And if we look at those hands, what are we doing? So we use curiosity and focus of attention. But what we don't do is fuss about where the client goes. We have no interest in taking them into a trance or not taking them into a trance. I never say to a client, close your eyes. I never say open your eyes. I never say breathe deeply or not breathe deeply. And they will all do it. Now, I've seen people do things that a lot of people talk about. I've seen Freddie Jaquin's arrow process done by people spontaneously, something similar to that. I've seen the swan emerging all the time. I had someone in Portugal who just went into, his eyes were doing an EMDR. And I said to him afterwards, I actually checked his eyes to see he didn't have something wrong with him. And I said, and I wonder what you were working with. And he said, I was just remembering a traumatic, I had this traumatic experience. And so there was it. And remember, Francine Shapiro said, she didn't invent the eye movements. She saw people doing the eye movements and then examined into a space. So we'll create an inductive sense of focus, and we use the hands to do that as much as is required. But I do show when I teach a formal sort of way, which sometimes I use and sometimes I don't, because eventually all therapy is improvised when you're co-creating the experience. Then we will invite the client to differentiate the element in different ways. And often it's the client who's induced it, but we give like in the book I write, we give a half a dozen suggestions that we find come up quite often. Like sometimes we put the problem in this hand and, well, then here's the not problem. We might put the pain in here. So here obviously is the not pain, is the coping mechanism. We'll put the as I say, pragmatic, the smoking in this hand. Well, here's the not smoking, and it allows people to do it. You can do a review program. Well, let's review the problem. And now let's review the solution. Sometimes another one we find emerging a lot is here's one side of it, here's the other. Now, what do the hands want to do? That's a bit closer to what we now some people call parts therapy. But we don't ever say, now the parts want to come together, because maybe they don't. That's not to say, and I want to always cancel this, that when you do parts therapy, say now the parts come together, that's not going to be beneficial, because it probably, and most of the time it is. Trouble is the therapist is kind of guessing that this is going to be a good step, as different from allowing the client. Now, to give what happens very often is you don't ask. I had a client the other day, and she went very privately. One of the beautiful terms we have during the therapy is there a word or two you want to share, or do you want to just continue with your private inner work? And sometimes clients talk. I've had clients go, I've had clients go, get out of my way, which is great. Anyway, she got to the end and she said, that came, eyes open. She decided to return her focus. She said, that was just wonderful, but I'm really off. I really need some sort of something concrete. So even though I say to the therapist, don't say anything, she said, I need you to say something. So I began to put forward in a curious and engaged way what I was thinking. And then after a little while, she said, oh, yeah, I get it. And her left side sort of kicked in and away she went. So I was glad I didn't sort of just take back the frame, say all my wonderful stuff. I just gently. And see, I used to be an actor. This is what I learned in acting school. So it was never a surprise to me. The first play I directed when I was very green, I was telling the actor, now move over here. Now on this line, twist yourself there. And on that line, do this and go over there. And it was fabulous directing. But the actor wasn't what the actor wanted to do. And Erickson actually said this. It's amazing how many therapists invite their client out to dinner, but then tell them what to eat.
That's a really good line. I actually really like that. I haven't heard that one before.
Volume 3, page 2 of the 16-volume Erickson said. Not that I remember these things.
It's approximately volume 3, page 16, 3/4 of the way down. Might be about paragraph 4, I think, line 3.
But it is interesting. Well, I had the great privilege to review the 16 volumes, and I've been doing that one volume every 4 months for the last 5 years. So, and I've just completed the 16 volumes.
I think even when I first met you, you were in the process of that very act.
Yeah, I can't believe that
I've even then. I think so. It's been a good body of work to get through.
Yeah, and and so this frame. And interestingly, now one of the things that I know you want to talk about in these things is the induction, and particularly when working online. And I would suggest that the mirroring hands approach, and then particularly the mirroring hands technique, has absolutely no difference face-to-face, online, with your eyes open, with your eyes closed, standing on your head, juggling, because you're not doing it. Now, it is, I imagine, there are other things that are pertinent in when you are actually taking someone through a framework, or where you're relying on certain bits of dialogue or certain forms, or as someone says, you know, there's so many things that they're not necessary, but they're already in the element. I mean, they talk about pacing. We talk about pacing. Well, if I'm co-responding with the client and the client is in charge, it's their pacing. I just follow their pacing. I just engage with their pacing. So many of those technical things, when you allow them to merge, and we begin the process simply by focusing the attention. And we just use the hands. Now, there's all kinds of interesting neurobiological reasons why the hands are great. They occupy an enormous amount of, an excessive amount of real estate in the brain. So they're very large items in our focus of attention. So if you actually just sit and look at your hands and really begin to focus on them, that focus is, so I suppose it's the swinging watch of the
absorption part of it. Yeah, it's the bring the attention.
But they beautifully become kind of larger, and this is a neurobiological, just normal, expected process. And as we focus in on the attention of the hands, we then ask, once we see that attention occurring, we then ask someone, the client, I wonder if they're, and invite, I wonder if you can feel some difference. Is one hand heavier or warmer? Now, they might respond very easy to that, but sometimes you might go elsewhere and say, I wonder if one is the younger you, or I wonder if this is and then people might even say, oh, it's this, which is terrific. But as soon as, let's take one of the simple ones like heavier, they say, oh, and the hand will twitch. They go, oh, that one, oh, this hand is twitched and it feels heavier. Well, as soon as you've done that, you are now in some degree of trance.
Correct.
Because it's an altered reality, because it isn't heavy. I mean, it's a hand. It's just, but it's now a internally self-held pattern of mentalization of their experience. And then it's a matter of just moving in and allowing the process to continue in whatever way it does. I've had people who are really pragmatic and just sit there and just do it with a real cognitive way. Yeah, this is good. I had a business guy, and I said, well, when you go into a meeting and you just before the meeting, put all the shit that you're going to screw up in this hand, and then throw it away, and then put all the brilliant things about your capacities and strengths in this hand, and you put that, where do you want to put that? And he actually said, I want to put it in my brain. I said, it's okay, so put it in your brain. So he literally got back to me and said, so what I do, I got to the meeting, I looked at my hands, I put all the shit there, I did that, I went to the meeting, I was brilliant. And I thought, on a cognitive basis, just on a cognitive basis. So it was a CBT behavior. Now, we won't go into the fabulous stuff that I've been working on with Joseph Ledoux's and Richard Brown's teaching on the nature of emotional perception, the cognitive thing. Really interesting, but we won't do that now. But there's a lot of good information to understand that if we think better thoughts, we put that into our autobiographical memory recall in relation to what we're doing, we are going to improve our emotional state. Yeah. So everything works when it's from a positive frame. So with the client, we work, we do this, we start, and then we allow things to occur. Some will close their eyes. Some will go into very deep trance-like states. Some will go into, I've had people go into very deep trance. Something will happen to disrupt, they'll come out. I've had someone say, I have to go to the bathroom. You know, go to the bathroom, come in, fascinating stuff. Totally in their control. But with my participation. I had someone the other day who was working with a great deal of insecure attachment. And she said, no, I've solved it. I've had 10 years of therapy. I've got that. Now I just have this problem here. I said, okay, well, let's just put that over there, or put that, I wonder which hand. And she began to receive it. And then she went, oh, I don't like that. I want to get it away from me. I said, oh, good. Well, what does your hand want to do? It wants to go away. I said, well, why don't you let it? Which she did. And then I said, well, I wonder what's in this hand. And she began to see husband and child, and she knows. And then this hand came up and started doing this. And she went, whoa, what's that? Oh, I'm pulling stuff. Oh, my God, I'm pulling stuff out. And then she started to do it dramatic. She said, no, I haven't got rid of it. Oh, my God. And she's pulling this stuff out of this side. This strength side is staying there. And she said, no, I thought I'd got rid of it. But, oh, this is terrible. Then she began to cry. She said, this is frightening. I'm beginning scared. Now, here is where, I don't know, but there are a certain number of therapists would start to think, oh, my God, this is an abreaction. This is a danger. But no, she was in control. She's externalized. There's a bunch of, this was what we call the phase shift, the point of boiling. And most good therapy happens then. So she kept pulling this stuff, and I just said, I am here. We're doing this together. You're throwing this out onto my floor. I'll vacuum it up tomorrow. That gave her a bit of a giggle. And she kept doing this. She did this for 3 or 4 minutes. And she said, my God. And then she slowed down. And I said, there may be some more in there may be not. But where's this now? And she said, I'm going to fill that. And she did some bits and pieces of her own. But this wonderful opportunity for her to realize. Now, if I had done something that said to her, because I was aware that she still had stuff inside her, I said, can you feel it? Can you pull it out? Are you able to now feel that? Or I'd taken her on a timeline thing and done that. I'm sure she might have done something similar. But because it was all generated in her own timing and in her own pacing and her own movements, I think the effect of it is greater. And that's why I love mirroring hands rather than some of the other processes, which I say do good, but it's a different structure for me.
And that's the thing, as we said earlier, I think if people are finding that it's a little bit quiet for them at the moment, then now might be a great time to really open up their toolbox and to explore, how they can enrich or refine some of the tools they may have, or to place some new tools in there. The other thing that I find really interesting about talking about this topic, the reason why we thought we'd do online inductions is because in a practice group, that's probably something you can do quite easily. Yeah. And have some experience with and help to build confidence, as opposed to necessarily going down the path of a whole approach.
Yeah, because that's the beautiful thing with mirroring hands is the client is running it. So they just go wherever they go, you watch. But remember, when you're online, you always have this right by you and their telephone number in the front, because if you have a dropout, now the benefit of mirroring hands is if it does drop out, they're not in your induction, they're in their own induction, and so it's most likely that they'll be able to recover quite successfully. But if the internet drops out, you jump on that phone straight away, and you make sure they have that next to them as well, so that you can carry it on at least verbally. So that's always terribly important with connection, and it's the same thing in the room. To an extent, when they disappear out of the space, you need to be able to have your secondary mechanisms and methods to bring them back into the connected space with the therapist. But certainly online, that's the thing. So that's very important.
I think also the other thing that these short chats have shown is that a hypnotic induction isn't necessarily the words on the page. And it's been great to be able to speak with people to just remind people of what an induction actually is, whether it be, that inward focus, or whether it be the buy-in that might exist beforehand, or whether it be that ratification or feedback that you give as it goes on as well. All those different components that together form an induction.
That incredibly naturalness of it. And I always say to people that saying, "Oh, well, no, but didn't Erickson invented or Hellman invented and do it?" Shakespeare had Hamlet talking to a skull, and he became quite entranced in his conversation with Yorick. I knew him well, to be or not to be.
Well, yes.
And
to say, you knew him well.
Yeah, I knew him well, and entered into this deep exploration of his implicit world that was troubling him cognitively, but and out of that speech emerges all these implicit realizations going along. Human beings have been doing this for a long time.
Shakespeare also reminded us that all the world's a stage.
Absolutely. I mean, if you actually if you look through Shakespeare, you can find a large number of the therapeutic processes that we think are modern inventions, that are actually just natural aspects of human behavior. But one of the things that we've really come to grips with, because we lost it for a while, particularly in psychotherapy and psychiatry, that it was this totally therapist-led, that we've returned now to this understanding that it's a relational experience between the therapist and the client. And people say, "Oh, that's new." No, what we've done is we've stopped doing what's wrong and we've returned to what's natural. And we've been doing this for thousands of years, and possibly interspecies, that engagement between two members of the group in order to make them assist themselves to regain balance, to co-regulate, as we're now talking about in polyvagal theory. Deb Dana, I was talking to her the other day, and it's not that co-regulation is new, but we sure have as hell have forgotten about it. So.
And polyvagal, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's only something I've only heard about in the last 12 months. And clearly it's been around for a lot longer, but it seems to be the thing that everyone's going, "Oh, you need to check out polyvagal theory."
And what I talk about, people talk about the theory of. I'm now using the word the description of. And I said that to Deb the other night. We were talking. She said, "Yeah, we're just describing it. This ventral vagal and stuff. Yes, it is sort of like Stephen started doing this work in the mid-90s. But don't worry. Brain plasticity that we've been talking about in the last 10 years. Well, Marion Diamond told us first about that in the 1960s. It just comes when it comes, and it doesn't matter, And I didn't notice anything until early 2000s, when I emerged out of my my absolutely fun and gorgeous acting career of being deeply entrenched in experiential stuff into this academic frame, and I'm suddenly going, "Gee, the world's a bit interesting, isn't it? I didn't know this." So my blending has been, in later life. I think I probably started. How old are you now? You're about 12. Yeah, round about your age.
If people want to explore mirroring hands more with you, I know they've got a few options they can go down. There is, of course, your wonderful book that is available, both in hard copy and on Kindle.
And Audible as well. So spoken by the good self.
So I do have the Audible version.
Cool.
It was the first Audible book I got.
Oh, wonderful.
So that was the reason that made me go, "Oh, I might join Audible. I'll get Richard's book." But of course, you've got the online version nowadays as an introduction. So
yes, I decided that in the workshops, not that I was spending too much time on theory, but I was spending too much time on theory. My great belief is that people need to know more about what they're doing, even though what they're doing might be very good. But if you're going to be the captain of a sailboat, I really actually want you to know a bit about sails and things, and not just memorize, pull that rope, do this thing. And so I've done a foundational course where I go through a lot of the underlying frameworks. I still do some experiential videos I think we've got about 6 hours, so it's about 12 or so half-hour, 40-minute type of videos. And And I'm hoping that a lot of people coming to the workshops will have done the foundational course, and then we can spend more time doing it experientially. And I can explore some other areas of experiential stuff that, just more advanced and more developing work. So that's available. Now, I've got it on, it sits in the scienceofpsychotherapy.net academy. But I don't know, maybe I'll just give the web address, a quick website here for a 25, I've got it on 25% discount because why not? If I wanted to get rich, I'd do something else. So it's bit.ly, that one, /MH coupon 25.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
So
and I'll make sure that I type that up on the bottom of the screen as well. So,
oh, cool. Oh, good. Okay.
So people can, if they're jotting it down, it will only just disappear now.
Yes.
Right, there we go.
That's right. So I'll send you that to the confirmation of what it is. But that's a handy way. Just we're doing that for a little while everybody's not actually necessarily as economically fluid as.
No, it is the challenge at the moment, isn't it? But I think if people can, invest in something that is going to really help enrich their skills even further, that they're going to be able to take to work with clients as that starts to ramp up again, then I think that's then proven to be a really useful use of this time right now.
Yeah. So I had international tours we were going to do. A few weeks ago, people saying, "How are you going?" I said, "Well, I just want to ask you the question: how hard is it to cancel a 5-country tour, international tour of the world?" And they said, "I don't know." And I say, "Well, I'll tell you, it's very hard." Actually, I'm still now going through various travel insurances and things, trying to sort it out. But I've got another tour at the end of the year into Brazil and the US. And I don't know whether that's going to happen, but. So there's lots of activity and things that we need to gather and understand. And so, but I turned around and thought, oh, that's bad. And then we got a book contract for writing a neuroscience book. So I'm busy.
That's wonderful. Look forward to that book as well.
That'll be next year. So there's always exciting times when you keep producing. Not making any money. Got a little advance from them, but the excitement of exploring possibilities,
being curious and just continuing to delve in a little deeper into what you already know as well.
Yeah. Just pushing it out beyond the growing edge, into that unknown, as I know you do so excellently, and I was so grateful. That you included my work into your explorations, and as you say, you've forced yourself into it. I've made you come several times.
I was very lucky in my my diploma year because I had your good self, I had Rob McNeely, I had Gordon Emerson. I think I had some rather remarkable lecturers for that particular year. And giving you
that taste that invigorates your own, generates your own directions and strengths, rather than saying, well, I studied with this person and this is what I do. The most beautiful thing I got from Ernest Rossi at the end of an email in this sort of latter part of last few years, and he just wrote, blah, 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 saying we'll talk again soon. He said, and then just a separate paragraph, he said, be better than me, Ernie. And I just thought, wow, what a thing. Because Ernie's he's a walking genius.
It's incredible. And absolutely remarkable.
Be better than me. And with that inherent thing of, because I believe in you, I believe you can. So that's what I try and encourage and put out to whenever I teach and whenever I talk. And hopefully I've opened doorways so that people can find their betterness, their mostness.
I think that is part of the secret, though, when it comes to building confidence. And I think that is possibly the single biggest challenge that many hypnotherapists have over the course of their career is how to be confident in what they do. But, you know, confidence is not this thing that you suddenly turn on and it's there. At least that's not my impression of it, is that it's something that you continue to explore, and you allow yourself permission to make mistakes, and you keep playing and exploring and building on what it is you know until you suddenly realize that you are quite comfortable with that topic.
It's another long conversation. You could do a show on that, because
maybe I need to do a podcast on finding confidence for hypnotherapists. That might be a great one.
Yeah, and because I'd love to come on. Oh gosh, there's so much interesting stuff. My years as an actor, you know, then engaging with Ernie Rossi, and in fact, in the middle of our conversations, we had a week of conversations as we prepared to doing the book. That word emerged about 2.5 days in, and Ernie said, "Oh, let's just stop for a second and consider that, because there's something important about that word." And which we then did a whole exploration. So out of 2.5 days of constant chatter, that word jumped out, and the energy behind it, the need of it. So I think it's one of the most important things, and I think it's the one we don't understand enough. Confidence isn't G up. Confidence is a state of being. Anyway, another day on that one. Yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for your time this morning. I know you've got a fairly busy day ahead, but I truly appreciate you taking time out on this Saturday morning to have a bit of a chat for any of the people wanting to come onto the practice group.
My great pleasure. I hope everyone enjoys. I haven't gone on too much, but anyway, there's so much to say. Yeah.
Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, bye.